The Justice League was established to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The JLA first came together in 1960 in The Brave and the Bold number 28. They were Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Green Lantern, The Flash, and the Martian Manhunter. Pre-2017, the first three could be described as household names. Everybody knows who Superman is. Everybody knows who Batman is. And in the popular culture, Linda Carter's Wonder Woman is fondly remembered by a generation growing up in the late 1970s. Efforts to bring these characters together on the big screen in colour had previously proven fruitless, including one version by Mad Max director George Miller. By 2013, the other big name in comics, Marvel, had already assembled their Avengers, a massive success starring characters that hadn't broken the mainstream until their respective films. It was bright and colourful, and in spite of the size of the cast, it didn't buckle under the massive amount of characters. Because of this, people looked to DC and wondered how they would answer the call of the cinematic universe. They replied with the 2013 Superman film Man of Steel from director Zack Snyder and producer Christopher Nolan. To make a long story short, it was a shaky start. Although it is true that the film has its fans, many believed that grounding the bright blue Boy Scout into a more serious post-Dark Knight world didn't ring true, and the decisions by writer David S. Goyer and Zack Snyder proved controversial among the fans of the classic Superman. The next film was Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. It was terrible. Whereas Marvel's Avengers flew high and ended with smiles and triumph, BVS, as it's known, fell from a great height and left audiences like myself grim-faced and in a depression. The fundamental flaw in the initial phase for the DC Extended Universe were its efforts to distance itself from Marvel by being the total opposite. If Marvel could be fun and playful, then DC in contrast would have to be serious and overwhelming. It was not a good approach. With BVS, the creative team rushed to the team up rather than establish their characters. They killed off Superman, but they didn't earn it. Better people than me have covered this film in depth. I encourage you to seek out their reviews in your own time. Through the slush pile of narrative, mean-spirited superheroes, and a nauseatingly produced, aesthetically questionable David Ayer-led Suicide Squad, there came a film that critics and audiences could, for the first time in this new franchise, agree on. The standalone Wonder Woman film, directed by Patty Jenkins and starring Gal Gadot in the title role, proved to be the dawn breaking through the darkest night of the previous installments. Although not perfect by any stretch, the climax of the film folding back into the worst of Snyder's efforts on Dawn of Justice, the film treated the source material with respect, and ended with hope, with truth, and most importantly, wonder. The time was near for the world's greatest heroes to come together, but this version wouldn't take from the classic comic books. Zack Snyder based his JLA on the one featuring in the then current DC reboot, The New 52, which other DCU films like Wonder Woman and Shazam have taken inspiration from. In this instance, Teen Titan member Cyborg replaces the Martian Manhunter in the ranks, and in the film only, there's not a Hal Jordan or John Stewart Green Lantern anywhere to be seen. The production of Justice League was troublesome. Warner Brothers was not happy with Zack Snyder's vision for the film and requested changes after Batman v Superman underperformed and got a critical bashing, as I've highlighted already. Tragedy also struck when Snyder's daughter Autumn passed away during production, and so he left the project, and Avengers director Joss Whedon was hired to complete the film. but the turbulent making of was far from over. Another problem arose in reshoots when Superman Henry Cavill was contractually forbidden from shaving off the mustache he grew for Paramount's Mission Impossible Fallout, meaning it had to be digitally removed in post-production. The results are surprisingly unconvincing for a film that cost $300 million to make. Since the completion of the film, cyborg actor Ray Fisher has spoken out about Joss Whedon's unprofessional and abusive behaviour on set, and when enough time passes, I predict there will be a full documentary on the subject of the making of the film. The 2017 version of Justice League, derisively nicknamed Justice League, was released in cinemas to negative reviews from audiences and critics, and failed to turn a profit at the box office. This is in no small part thanks to the Frankensteinish nature of the final product. The 2017 cut of Justice League is a clash of two styles, with Zack Snyder's dark and operatic 1990s comic book aesthetic going as well with Whedon's smart Alec witticisms and Silver Age nostalgia as Nutella does with buttered toast. Fans of the previous films and the director's work lobbied hard for a Snyder Cut of Justice League. Hashtags on Twitter, placards at Comic Cons like one I saw in Dublin in the before time of 2019, and some left comments angry and benign to Warner Brothers on the internet, even on posts unrelated to DC or Justice League. People were convinced that they had been robbed of a great film by an auteur director, and in 2021 they got it. I don't know how many times in film history a studio has been bullied into making a film, but here it is. Justice League, the Snyder Cut, or Zack Snyder's Justice League to give it its proper title. Snyder's Justice League clocks in at 4 hours long with a 4:3 aspect ratio, chapter titles, a new score by Tom Holkenborg aka Junkie XL, and new scenes filmed in 2020 under COVID restrictions. There's also supposed to be a black and white version of the film somewhat pompously titled Justice is Grey. I have represented the facts so far, but here is where this video becomes a review. I confess that I'm not a fan of Snyder's previous DC-related films, although he is a more than competent visualist with a distinctive voice among the increasingly homogeneous blockbuster landscape. Concerning said DCEU work, Man of Steel sadly doesn't hold up since I first saw it, and I left Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice feeling as though I'd been mugged. It was a mean-spirited, poorly structured embarrassment. To be clear, I am willing to watch a different interpretation, and that was in part why I was initially positive towards Man of Steel. But as these films developed, I realised that ultimately the creative team of writers Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer ultimately do not care for the character of Superman. They are also careless in adhering to the Batman rule. Yes, I know there are instances of Batman taking lives in the comics, but the fans who love Batman and adhere by the core principles surely know that any adaptation that disregards them is missing the point of the character. To continue a point on Superman, they are uninterested in developing him, even retaining the hero from the comics. Also, the characterization and performance of Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, the Superman villain, remains one of the biggest turkeys in DC and Marvel movies. And when they've got Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face and Fant Four Sticks Dr. Doom, that's saying something. However, I was willing to watch Snyder's finished, or as close to finished as it can be, version of Justice League, as I do believe in artistic integrity over design by committee. But honestly, the fact that this exists is bizarre to me, as having read up on what it takes to put together a film and even worked on one in college, I didn't buy into any theory that there was a fully realised Snyder Cut canister in a guarded vault underneath the Warner Brothers water tower, nor that we'd ever see one be released to the public. I was this close to putting together a Father Ted joke where Dougal adds the Snyder Cut on the list of things that don't exist, but can't do it now. The film we have got is still very much a version of a film we won't get to see, because I doubt that everything here is exactly what would have happened in the film if everything had gone to plan. I've heard it called an assembly cut. That's apt. The Snyder League would definitely not have been 4 hours long had it been released back in 2017. I can't imagine Warner Brothers agreeing to that. You can compare to Marvel, and yes, Endgame was 3 hours long, but the devil is in the details, 3, not 4. Summertime audiences won't sit through a film as long as 4 hours. It's already warm enough in the cinema. Dropping it on a streaming service in 6 parts is unusual, but I suppose it's a help to the viewer, who can pause it at any time just to make the journey a little easier. Although the aspect ratio is reminiscent to me of old television shows or old films, it's been formatted this way in the hopes that it can be screened in IMAX once COVID's over. This is a Zack Snyder film without the restraints of blockbuster expectations or too many studio notes, and perhaps that makes it a more successful film. Not flawless in any sense of the word, but less compromised. This film, like the previous efforts by Zack, concerns itself with a spectacle. There's no short supply of action and dramatic slow motion. A bit too much for most people's taste, and in odd places like, of all things, a sesame seed. No, really. But all this is at the expense of the more human, quiet moments. We do have one with Lois Lane, played again by Amy Adams and sadly underwritten for a third time, and Martha Kent, Diane Lane, but it's succeeded by the reveal that was actually, spoilers, the Martian Manhunter disguised as Martha. You see, when all you have are the big moments, it can be exhausting. You have to value the downtime between the next set piece, or the next part where the character discovers something about themselves, or the villain's scheming. Incidentally, the villain of the piece, Steppenwolf, played by Ireland's own Ciarán Hinds, is much better realised visually in this version of the film, with much more attention to the moving metal costume and much more time spent trying to integrate the character in the action. He serves the narrative fine and this version of the DC universe, but he's neither an entertaining prima donna punching bag for the heroes as Loki was, nor is he as hypnotising as Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul. His nephew Darkseid sadly gets the short end of the stick, a faithful translation of his comic book self in appearance, but no depth on screen. Unfavourable comparisons can be made to Thanos because that's what happens when Marvel beats you to it. It's a pity, really. I keep wondering how much more interesting this would have been if they'd fought Starro, the giant alien starfish from the comics. They'd be distancing themselves from Marvel and absolutely insane in the best possible way, but I don't think that would fit the tone. Do you? Although DC have some strong antagonists, one should never prioritise them over the heroes you're supposed to be cheering over. That's what the MCU understood, and why for the longest time their villains weren't as developed. And in this film, the heroes are, sorry to say, on the same level as their villains. It is true that Cyborg is dealt a better hand in Zack's footage, and Ray Fisher acts well alongside Terminator 2 legend Joe Miles Dyson Morton. But this is a very loose translation of the comic character. As opposed to the fun if tragic brother figure that people know from Teen Titans, he's another brooding cynic saying "F*** the world" when it is better for the team dynamic that there should be only one, and if you know your stuff, you know it should be the Batman. Speaking of Batman, Ben Affleck plays him with a lot more enthusiasm when compared to previous film where it was clear that the production and, without speculating too much, his personal demons were impacting on his mood under the cowl. I once remarked that he had planted himself into the Sean Connery after Goldfinger level of interest about the role, going through the motions, wishing they were anywhere but here, and looking a little bit uncomfortable in delivering their lines. Affleck is a fine actor and he acquitted himself really well to the mantle of the Bat, but the material given, even here, doesn't reach the best of the films, nor even the comics, or the animated series. Any one of them. Ben Affleck is also among the actors who appears in newly shot footage, sharing one scene with Jared Leto's Joker where he tells him he will kill him. More on that later. Again, I'm not one to make personal comments, but Ben looks drastically different as Bruce in the closing scene. He seems much thinner and much more tired. But I suppose we're all tired after the exhausting nature of the pandemic. Hopefully he's doing okay. I think Gal Gadot did very well in the film, even though the screenplay makes the bizarre decision to establish that Diana stopped being a hero after World War I and the loss of Steve Trevor. It doesn't ring true and it's incredibly reductive, robbing any potential stories of Wonder Woman of the Roaring Twenties or the early Cold War or anything else really. Yes, there is a 1984 story to come, but that's the one with the deeply egregious and problematic creative decision in resurrecting Chris Pine's Steve Trevor. But as said, Wonder Woman 1984 is a different story and a crushing disappointment. I will say in her favour that the opening scene where Wonder Woman uses her amulets to bounce off the bullets being fired at innocent civilians is an effective and heroic beginning. Jason Momoa makes a good Aquaman, although I find it bizarre that they only went into the standalone film with him after the team up. Again, this is a problem with racing to the finish line before you build yourself up. One thing that makes the film unintentionally hilarious is how much they try to make Aquaman a cool and serious character, downing a bottle of Jack Daniels, throwing it on the ground, and embracing the ways. It goes beyond parody. And yet enough people connected with Momoa because his starring film made $1 billion at the box office. Ezra Miller's Flash is probably the best introduction in the film. In a different movie, the slow motion representing super speed would be reserved for this character only, so the impact is diluted for me at least. Although I can't deny that this film finds an interesting way to represent a speedster like Barry, and it's probably the most interesting sequence since the time in a bottle Quicksilver moment in X-Men Days of Future Past. Miller is a less irritating presence here than in the theatrical cut, but for me the humour still flounders. I like that they're the one to save the day, and had this been released on a big screen, I'm sure we'd all have complimented the cinema experience of seeing him go faster than the speed of light. The Martian Manhunter does get a total of 2 scenes. One is a dramatic reveal that only works if you know who the character is, and then at the end when he shows up at Bruce Wayne's pad. It's a bit of fan service as actor Harry Lennox starred as Swanwick in the previous Snyder films, where a lot of fans thought he was John Johns, that's the Martian Manhunter's real name, in disguise. It's a bit of an afterthought, because they never hinted at this before. Watching him fly away at the end puts me in mind of Leonard Nimoy's guest appearance on The Simpsons episode Marge vs. the Monorail.
Well, my work is done here.
What do you mean your work is done? You didn't do anything.
Didn't I?
Finally, Superman. It surprised me that the Snyder Cut utilises Superman even less than Batman v Superman, which we are reminded once again of in the Snyder Cut's opening, where the dying cries of Kal-El echo throughout the earth and wake the mother boxes. I'm grateful to no longer have to watch Henry Cavill's Snapchat filtered lips, but the film's interpretation of Superman still falls short. The Superman that the people involved clearly find interesting is the all-powerful but all-psychotic collateral damage god. They pontificate about his being a symbol of hope without actually showing it, just one creative decision away from being no better than Homelander from The Boys. And yeah, I said it. It's been written and spoken by critics and detractors that Snyder's heroes are objectivists, and it is never more evident in the film than with their idea of Superman. And that doesn't sit right with me. I mean, at least the theatrical Justice League felt more like the character. But, to be fair to this film, it has a great moment where he enters the battle with Steppenwolf and he stops the axe from cutting Cyborg down and freezes it with the super breath. Yeah, the fans get their black suit Superman, but did the film bother to justify it? No. It is fan service without meaning, and the last vestiges of the notorious unmade Tim Burton directed Superman Lives, which Snyder's version feels a lot like. It's a pity that the original superhero through the 3 films under Snyder is characterised this way. I want to be clear that a different interpretation is absolutely fine, but this one was not a success, and much like Sony's Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, Henry Cavill, although he looks well in the costume and clearly cares enough about the responsibility of being a hero, he just never got to be a truly good, truly faithful version of the last son of Krypton. Like Brandon Routh and Brian
Bloody pervert!
Singer's Superman Returns, the shadow of Christopher Reeve looms over all subsequent portrayals of the Man of Steel, and both films' characterization of said Man of Tomorrow leaves an awful lot to be desired. Some critics probably hope that this film has set the final word on the story of the initial DCEU. I'm not exactly crying out for more. Now that the release of the Snyder Cut movement has been put to bed, and they're reasonably happy with the film, can we move on with our lives? Well, evidently not, as Restore the Snyderverse has been floating around on Twitter. I guess the story never ends. Bit like this film. It's clear to me that the last shot of Justice League is Superman opening the shirt to reveal his symbol. It's a well-worn iconic image, most notably from the 1978 Richard Donner movie. Absolutely fine. Makes sense to end it there. But the film refuses. Instead of having new scenes layered during the credits, they play out before they roll. There's the tease with Eisenberg's Lex Luthor and Deathstroke played by Joe Manganiello, the other Sam Raimi Spider-Man actor in this film apart from Willem Dafoe, setting up an Injustice League because a Legion of Doom would be too fun, as well as Ben Affleck's solo Batman film, which isn't going to happen now. There's also one more visit to the Nightmare world, the first really new scene. COVID would be damned if they filmed it. I wasn't gone on it. Any goodwill this film had left was eroding fast for me. I already don't like Jared Leto's imitation Heath Ledger version from that Suicide Squad film. His interactions with Batfleck are nowhere near as incredible as some people on the internet have been praising. For the best, look no further than the 90s animated series. Still holds up. As said, there's also the scene of the Martian Manhunter and Bruce Wayne. I've already made a point about that, so I won't repeat myself. The film ends with a poignant dedication to Autumn Snyder and a cover of Hallelujah plays over the names of those who made the film happen. Although many criticise Zack's use of Leonard Cohen's song, I've been made aware that it was his daughter's favourite. There's nothing else to add out of respect. Although there are fans out there who want more from Zack Snyder's vision of the characters, I have doubts that the man will return to this universe. If there's more, okay, but if not, I won't lose sleep over it. It's clear to me that Zack's more interested in the post-apocalyptic potential future, as evident from BVS and this Justice League, than the one that Warner Brothers wanted. Maybe he should make that film, but it's not my place to tell anyone what to do. I think he should make it because it's the only place I can think of where those versions of the characters could exist and make sense, rather than trying to have the classic characterization and the new Elseworld version, which you can't. Sorry, it doesn't ring true. To use a line from his own film, that is paradoxical. By the time this video drops, it'll be 2 months since the film was released on streaming services. In that time, I've seen a generally good but mostly mixed reaction from critics and audiences. Some of the views I've expressed I share with others. And in terms of comic book movies right now in the not-so-roaring 20s, I think we've become less fussy over continuity and we're trying to tell much more personal stories. The days of superhero movies leading up to big earth-changing events is at this point in time very much over, and we're already living through one big earth-changing event at the moment, so one's enough, thank you very much. After a tempestuous production like Justice League, it's fair to say the DC model changed. Aquaman got his own film, a world and style apart from this one and probably a bit too long, and one that is getting a sequel though, not a spin-off, which was cancelled in April 2021. The next year for DC would be much different. Shazam, from horror film director and YouTuber David F. Sandberg, was a wonderful film with a style whimsy and the darker edge ripped straight out of an 80s family film with barely any connection to what came before. It seemed that DC found their way to stand shoulder to shoulder with Marvel, while the world of Avengers and Guardians could connect their films into a vast narrative, a cinematic universe. DC could be much looser, and while no one ever said you couldn't explore deeper themes, you don't have to be so serious all the time, and you don't have to strive to be bigger. You can be more smaller scale, but relevant and resonant. Another fun piece was Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn, the film finally giving Margot Robbie a chance to take centre stage as the character. It was campus Christmas and I loved it, and Ewan McGregor was surprisingly good as Black Mask. There are more films to come, including Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn's standalone Suicide Squad, which I hope can be a much more pleasant and entertaining experience than Ayer's version, but who knows where DC will be in years to come. Will there be that superhero fatigue? Will they go the way of the westerns as Steven Spielberg once hypothesized? Will DC and Marvel return to the printed pages, or will there even be a movie-going audience? Only time will tell. To conclude the longest video I've ever made for YouTube, though not as long as the film itself, Zack Snyder's Justice League is, yes, more watchable than BVS, and it is a much better written film than BVS and a far less unpleasant experience, but the sins of the past remain in this one. It is Snyder's vision true and true, intrusive music regardless of quality, slow motion, occasionally awkward CGI, and excess. And this isn't a Richard Donner Superman 2 situation where another edit would be welcome. What you see is what you get. If you're in love with the Snyder films, or the Snyderverse, you'll get something out of it. If you detest his work, this probably won't change your mind. Me personally, it's okay. I knew what I was going into, and for what it was acceptable. The previous films aren't made much better by it, but at least we now have as close to complete a trilogy of films. You know, I've seen it, I don't have much drive to revisit it. There are things to like here, and it feels like a film more than an awkward TV pilot, but there's a lot more they could have done better. If things had been different in 2017, who knows what kind of film this could have been. For the fans who really wanted this film, it's a game show's consolation prize. And for me, it's a 4 out of 10.